Karla Schaefer, designer for Antiques Beads, and I'll be demonstrating how to make a multi-stranded Amazonite and Smokey quartz necklace. The tools and materials used for this project will be a small bead board. I'm going to be using 3 different types of gemstones. I'm going to be using an 8mm Amazonite strand. I'm going to be also using a 6mm Amazonite strand. We're also going to be using a Smokey quartz gemstone nugget strand. You will need a 3-stranded slide lock clasp. You'll need 6 crimp beads. You will also need a 49 strand 0.018 beading wire. I'm also going to be using the magical crimp forming tool for the 0.08 wire, and I'm also going to be using a nipper tool. Okay, the first thing that I've done is I have cut my strands, and on the 6mm Amazonite strand I actually use a little more than 1 strand, so you would need to purchase 2 strands, but that all depends on the length of the necklace that you want. And when you are using a bead board, the outside strand, this has 3 channels, and this outside strand is where I want to pick up my length, and I'm going to put, I want to have about to the 11 mark, so about 22 inches. Now when it's strung, it's going to come down a little bit, and you can just use the channels and the measurements. I wouldn't be so much worried about how many beads I have on each side as I am is it lining up to each mark, because the nuggets are irregular in size, and sometimes your rounds are too. So be more conscious of your measurement on your board than you are of the actual beads and how many you've used to keep, symmetry and what have you. I guarantee you once it's put together, you're really not going to notice any of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, have often said when I'm using a slide lock clasp, is to work with it closed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to string my outside strand to the clasp and string this on, and then I'm going to put a bead stopper on it. I'm only going to string one side of this clasp at a time, so I'm going to use bead stoppers to keep all my beads from sliding off my wires here first. And I have pre-cut my wire, but I don't need it to be this long, but I like to work with a little extra wire, so I've got this about 24 inches. And the first thing we're going to do is string on our first crimp bead. And since this is my outside strand, I'm going to be using the top of the slide lock loop here, which really is determined once you put that middle strand in. And slide it back through the crimp. And I'm going to be using the magical crimp forming tool, because it's my favorite, to crimp. And this tool takes a little practice to get that nice round bead, and if you prefer, you can flat crimp or use your designer crimp tool in crimp covers. So I've got that, and now I'm just going to simply string on this first strand. Using the bead board allows you to get enough space in between your strands so that they lay properly. And we'll get this strung. And I'll show you how we'll do the second one. This is a kind of an interesting way to showcase different kinds of stones together and even colors together. I saw a gem at a museum of Amazonite and Smokey quartz put together, and that did inspire my colors here, which I think is pretty cool. Alright, so now that we've got the first strand on, like I said, I'm not going to connect it yet. I'm going to go ahead and string them all on just in case I need to make some adjustments. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to string it into this side of the slide lock clasp. But first thing I'm going to do for now is I'm going to use my bead stopper so I can keep my strands together. You also want to make sure that you get your beads over that little wire tail from the crimp bead on the end there. And it's good to go ahead and do that at the beginning, so when I put my stopper on there, it's already taken care of. And the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take another piece of my wire, which I've cut to 24 inches, and I'm going to again crimp it to my clasp. So I'm going to pick up a crimp bead, and this time I'm sliding it into the middle. And slide your crimp over your, slide it back through. And use my crimp tool again. Till I get my little round bead. And then I'm ready to string my second strand. And I'm going to take the strand, the beads that I have laid out in the pattern, in the middle channel of the beadboard. And we're going to bring these down till we get them all on. And I'll show you how to do the third strand. Okay, now that I have the second strand almost strung, again, I want to just check to make sure that I've got my tail covered up by my beads here on the end. And I'm going to add the last of the strands, beads to the strand, and I'm going to put my bead stopper on. And start our third and final strand. Before we do crimp all this together, I will, lay it out and make sure everything measures just right. That way, if we need to make some adjustments, we can. So I'm just going to take my last piece of wire and another crimp bead. And crimp it into the bottom loop on the clasp. You've got plenty of extra wire, so you don't need to worry about how long that tail is. You can also trim it if you want. Just make sure you have enough to work with. Sometimes it's a little difficult to get in here when you've got all this going on. Just keep working that crimp bead until you get it nice and round. And then we're ready to string our last strand. Now that I've got all three of my strands strung on the necklace, I'm going to show you how this lays out. I know before I told you that was the top loop, and it really is the top loop until you look at it on the beadboard and it's the bottom loop. So anyway, I'm going to lay it out here and show you so we can line it up and make sure everything is where we want it, and the measurement is all good before we add all of our other strands to the clasp. It's just that about the only time I use a beadboard is when I'm trying to lay something out like this, and that's just a personal preference. It's really all, what you want it to be and how you want it to be. So if I scoot these to where my numbers line up with my beads, I can see that I'm pretty much right on the money here, and everything looks very good. So look, there's one stray little bead there, and I may want to see where he might need to go, and it might be on this strand right here. I'm just going to add that. And again, I'd be more worried about measurement and everything lining up just right instead of how many beads are on each side. So now that I've got this strand open, and it doesn't matter which strand you start with as long as you get them in the corresponding loops on the clasp. So this was my inside strand, and this is my inside strand, so I'm going to crimp into this loop, which is directly opposite. And I'm going to bring it, run my wire back through the crimp, and I'm also going to run through at least one of these beads. I can get it in there. Okay. Then I'm going to tighten it all up. I'm going to let it hang so I can see if I need to bring them up. See right here I've got a little slack along the crimp, so I do want to bring that, tighten it up just a little bit. But you still want to have some flexibility in it. I got where I want to be. And I'm going to just crimp this bead. And then I'm going to trim my wire. And you just do this for the other 2 strands. Okay, now I have completed all 3 of my strands, got them all crimped on into the slide lock, and as you can see how it lays now, it's really a very pretty necklace, and when it's on, it's even better. Again, the benefit of using a bead board is having this spacing help you lay it all out and get the correct spacing in between here. And our slide lock works and functions just fine now, and we put it together, and I just hope you enjoy making your own formations.